What if I told you the Supreme Court just made a decision that could completely redefine who gets to own a gun in America? This isn't about criminals or violent offenders. This is about whether the government can strip away your Second Amendment rights simply because they don't like what you're doing. A bombshell case was just granted review by the Supreme Court today, and the ruling could change the constitutional landscape forever. Before we break down exactly what's at stake here, hit that subscribe button right now, because YouTube actively suppresses Second Amendment content. And I need your help to make sure this critical information reaches everyone who needs to hear it. The constitutional crisis nobody saw coming. The Second Amendment says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But here's what most Americans don't realize. The federal government has created over 20 different categories of people who are permanently or temporarily banned from owning firearms, and Congress keeps adding more every single year. Right now, approximately 8 million Americans are prohibited from gun ownership under various federal statutes, and that number grows by hundreds of thousands annually. The case granted review today challenges one of the most widely applied prohibition categories, affecting an estimated 31 million Americans who have used controlled substances in the past year, according to national survey data. How one federal law affects millions without them knowing. Federal Law 18 U.S.C. 922 G3 makes it a felony, punishable by up to 10 years in prison for anyone who is an unlawful user of or addicted to any controlled substance to possess a firearm. And this law has resulted in over 7,500 federal prosecutions in just the last 3 years alone. The term unlawful user isn't clearly defined in the statute, which means federal prosecutors have enormous discretion to charge people who might have used marijuana weeks or even months before touching a gun. In states where marijuana is legal under state law, residents still face federal prosecution under this statute, because marijuana remains illegal under federal law, creating a constitutional nightmare where state legal activity triggers loss of federal constitutional rights. The dangerous precedent hidden in plain sight. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in this case that the federal government cannot ban someone from possessing firearms unless they were actually intoxicated at the moment of possession. But this reasoning exposes a massive gap in how courts interpret the people protected by the Second Amendment. If the government can strip your constitutional rights based on behavior they disapprove of, even when you're not engaged in that behavior at the time, then what stops them from expanding prohibited categories to include people who drink alcohol, take prescription medications, or engage in any other legal activity the government decides makes you irresponsible? The Supreme Court's recent Bruin decision in 2022 established that gun regulations must be consistent with historical tradition. Yet the government is arguing that 18th and 19th century laws disarming dangerous people justify modern prohibitions on anyone who uses substances that weren't even illegal during the founding era. Historical records show that the founders never created broad categorical bans on gun ownership. Instead, they focused on disarming people during actual dangerous conduct, not based on status or past behavior. This case will force the Supreme Court to decide whether the people means all citizens, unless individually proven dangerous, or whether the government can carve out entire classes of Americans from constitutional protection based on disapproved conduct. But there's one critical element about how this case reached the Supreme Court that reveals the government's strategic calculation in choosing this particular challenge. Why the government chose this fight now. The Department of Justice had dozens of similar cases involving drug users and gun possession that were making their way through federal courts. Yet they specifically chose this case to bring before the Supreme Court. And the reason why reveals their entire legal strategy. The defendant in this case has multiple factors that make him extremely unsympathetic. Dual citizenship, with a country that has complicated relations with the United States, placement on a federal watch list, evidence of communications with questionable foreign contacts, and admission to frequent marijuana use while also possessing other controlled substances. By selecting a defendant with this profile, the government is betting that the Supreme Court justices will be reluctant to rule broadly in favor of Second Amendment rights when it would benefit someone who appears to pose potential national security concerns. This is the same playbook federal prosecutors used in previous landmark cases where they deliberately chose unfavorable defendants, knowing that bad facts make bad law and that courts are more likely to limit constitutional protections when the immediate beneficiary is unsympathetic. Statistics show that when the Supreme Court takes cases involving rights of unpopular defendants, they rule in favor of the government 68% of the time compared to only 43% when defendants are more sympathetic. The Raheem decision's shadow over gun rights. Last term's Supreme Court decision in United States versus Raheem involved whether people subject to domestic violence, restraining orders could be prohibited from possessing firearms, and the court upheld that restriction in an 8-1 decision that sent shockwaves through Second Amendment advocacy circles. The majority opinion included language about courts taking a more nuanced approach to Second Amendment cases and considering how societal problems have evolved since the founding era, which immediately gave lower courts permission to water down strict constitutional scrutiny. In the 6 months since Raheem was decided, federal district and circuit courts have cited that nuanced approach language in at least 34 published decisions to uphold gun restrictions that previously would have failed constitutional review under the Bruin standard. Courts are now using Raheem to justify assault weapon bans, high-capacity magazine prohibitions, may issue concealed carry schemes, and enhanced background check requirements by arguing these restrictions are nuanced responses to modern problems. The government's petition in this new case cites Raheem 18 times and explicitly asks the Supreme Court to further develop the framework established there, which is code for "give us more tools to restrict gun rights." The constitutional question that changes everything. The fundamental difference between domestic violence restraining orders and drug use is that restraining orders require individualized judicial findings of dangerousness based on specific threatening conduct, while drug use prohibitions apply categorically to millions of Americans based solely on their personal consumption choices without any individualized determination of threat. Research from the Rand Corporation found that people who use marijuana are statistically no more likely to commit violent crimes than people who drink alcohol. Yet, alcohol consumers face no federal firearms prohibition, while cannabis users lose their Second Amendment rights permanently until they can prove sobriety. The Supreme Court has never directly addressed whether the Second Amendment protects only law-abiding citizens or all citizens unless individually proven dangerous, and this case will force them to answer that exact question in a way that affects not just drug users, but potentially any future category of people the government wants to disarm. If the court rules that the people can be narrowly defined by Congress to exclude anyone engaged in behavior the government disapproves of, it would fundamentally transform the Second Amendment from an individual right into a government-granted privilege that can be revoked based on subjective determinations of responsibility. The Supreme Court's decision in this case won't just determine one man's fate. It will define whether your Second Amendment rights are truly constitutional protections or merely government privileges that can be stripped away whenever they decide you're not responsible enough. This is the most important gun rights case of the decade, and most Americans have no idea it's even happening. If you want to stay informed as this case develops and understand exactly how it will affect your constitutional rights, you need to subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single update. Share this video with every gun owner you know, because the mainstream media won't cover what's really at stake here. And we need to spread this information before it's too late.